has gotten dangerous, hasn't it? It's the most dangerous we as a living people have ever seen. There are very few people left that remember World War II, and I wonder if they ever thought they would see World War III. If you are anywhere close to my age, you won't have any problem remembering the fear tactics of the Cold War. Many a classroom practiced nuclear attack drills where they would have you get under your desk to protect you from the window glass blowing into the classroom. Was there ever a real imminent threat of nuclear attack in West Alexandria, Ohio, a very rural Mayberry kind of town in 1967? Wright Patterson wasn't too far away, and I guess if we could put a rocket on the moon and the evil Soviets could circle the globe with theirs, then what chance did we have in Little Town, USA? People took it seriously, though. We knew about Korea, even though it was before I was born, but that really wasn't a war, was it? That so called police action cost the lives of 2.5 million Koreans. Most were non combatants. Over 36,000 young Americans lost their lives in what many felt was not even a legal engagement. Vietnam was right on the heels of that, and almost 60,000 American men died at the average age of 19. There were 2 million Vietnamese that died. As with any war, civilian losses far exceeded military losses, all for a cause that is still unclear. But what was clear about those and other so-called engagements was that they were not declared acts of war. They were not constitutional and offered little to no strategic advantage to the United States or its citizens. Has anybody ever stopped and asked why the U.S. has been fighting for 228 of 245 years? There has been somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 engagements by the United States military and only 11 declarations of war from Congress, the last one being World War II. Despite Ike's military background and being the only general to be elected president in the 20th century, he warned the nation with regard to the corrupting influence of what he described as the military-industrial complex.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
But how many of us really know what that means? What it should mean is if we need battle tanks like the M1 Abrams to defend our nation, we create a factory such as General Dynamic Land Systems to produce them, and that's where it should end. But it doesn't. General Dynamics is not a government entity, but rather a publicly traded company that the taxpayer paid the startup cost as well as any production cost, which is about $10.5 million to make just one of the M2. Not a bad deal for General Dynamics. No production cost, and they keep the profits, but not so good for Americans. A publicly traded company answers to its stockholders, whether it's consumer products or defense contractors like General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, AT, General Electric, Boeing, or any of the large funds investing in them like BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street. It is a war for profit on the backs of the American public. And since there are only so many tanks, missiles, or other armaments we need to protect our homeland, and only so many that NATO countries require to protect theirs, they do what any profit-driven company does. They create an open market. This open market doesn't see our best, though. For instance, we didn't send the M2 Abrams tank to Ukraine. We sent the cheaper M1s because we couldn't risk the M2s with their advanced armor falling into Russian hands, or so the Pentagon says. It is more likely that they are easier to blow up so you can make money on the replacements. The actual cost doesn't matter, though, because you're paying for them anyway. That last round of $60 billion won't go to Ukraine. At least most of it won't, if it ever gets released at all. That money goes to defense contractors like Raytheon, General Dynamics, AT&T, Lockheed Martin, and a whole host of other contractors and subcontractors who in turn pump millions back into DC. Oh, there'll be just enough to keep the Ukrainian government functioning and pay for the military for a little while anyway, but everyone knows the well has dried up on both sides. The mighty military-industrial complex cannot make any more money off Ukraine right now, and once the colonels and generals figure out there's no more money to skim, if they don't turn their weapons on Kiev and force a surrender, they will be on their way to Cyprus, Bahamas, Florida, or wherever they have their pilfered golden parachute stashed courtesy of Uncle Sugar, and the fight at that point will be over if Russia hasn't finished them off by then. That's just one weapon system that we have on the open market, and NATO or anyone else with the money is the market. NATO is a military alliance, of course, and in nearly every way, USA is NATO. So when it comes time to shop for arms, they shop at the NATO swap meet, for lack of better terms. Tanks, missiles, radar systems, you name it, you'll find it there if you have the money. It doesn't matter if the product is not fit for battle, such as the F-35 junk strike fighter, which is vastly inferior to the F-22 Raptor and the Su-57 from the Russians. We stopped production of the F-22 in 2012, where we still have 182 of them, and but that's all we're getting from Lockheed Martin. And fortunately, none of those have been exported. Lockheed Martin is now focused on the broader market, the world market, where the big money is, hence the F-35. Point is that the United States does not make weapons for national defense. We make them for the open market, for profit. Victoria Nuland gives you a peek here, but it's hardly the entire picture.
Well, first on Europe protecting itself, all of us have to invest not only in Ukraine's fight, but in rebuilding our own defense industrial bases because we have, given so much to Ukraine, and we've also understood that some of these systems that we thought we would never need, 155 artillery, are clearly still part of the kit. So the fact that, as I said, with regard to our own package, so much of it goes right back into the US economy to replace and allow us to send other stuff to Ukraine. It serves a threefold purpose, right? It helps Ukraine, it provides jobs in the United States, and it serves as an economic stimulus. And I think countries like Germany are starting to see the same requirement. And so that is a good thing.
She's only half lying. The money does come back to the United States, not to you though. They don't create new jobs, but rather only feed the corporations, their stockholders, and of course your favorite politician. Isn't it ironic that the only actual people making direct money are literally making it from stealing, whether it's Zelensky, his cabinet, and officers skimming for their inevitable defeat, or the politicians with their payoffs, defense contractors, and PAC contributions? I have a video in the mix spelling it all out and who benefits. It isn't as complicated as you think it is. Of course, peace is antithetical to the mighty military industrial war industry, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that our own government has become masters at creating an arms market by destabilizing nations, regime change initiatives, proxy wars, and wrecking economies via the SWIFT banking system. The CIA and other so-called secret organizations in the hopes of removing the last vestiges of Western competition. It doesn't matter that they pose no threat to us as a nation as long as the neocons in DC and their sponsored press corps keep presenting false threats. Why would we ever need a real one? Mitt Romney stood up in front of everyone with this mouthful of babble.
But if your position is being cheered by Vladimir Putin, it's time to reconsider your position. What sending weapons to Ukraine does do is help discourage further Russian and Chinese invasions, which could draw us in. It helps preserve NATO. It allows America to remain the leader of the free world. And it shows that we honor our word to our friends and allies. Lech Walesa, the first democratically elected president of Poland since 1926, recently wrote to all the United States senators. He said this, quote, "You're obliged to assure a peaceful future for your children. Our grandchildren will never forgive us if we fail to stop Russia now. If the U.S. does not lead, nobody will. Helping a free people defend their freedom is simply the right thing to do."
There is more, but does anyone know what this guy is talking about? Who wrote that for him? The vice president? How does that make any sense at all to anyone that has even an inkling of understanding of China? The only way China is a threat to the United States is economically. And China's economy isn't in the greatest shape right now, but they have made themselves the world's manufacturer of consumer goods like iPhones and televisions. They did not steal that, though. We handed our manufacturing base to them along with our technologies, and they ran with it. China does not want to do anything to interfere with their recent market economy, especially something as stupid and costly as war. If we want a manufacturing base that competes with China, perhaps we should be investing there instead of startups. Who exactly needs another app? No, I don't see anything that directly indicates China as a threat to the United States at all. Besides, their military has only been tested twice in what amounts to minor border skirmishes. Both lasted about 6 months and both resulted in defeat. Russia in 1969 and Vietnam in 1979, and their current military is clearly developed for the defense of their own borders. I know a few armchair politicians and even a few civilian generals that disagree with Chinese humanitarian policies or how they run their government. But if we were being honest, myself included, we know next to nothing about China And even if we did, it's China, for goodness sake. It has nothing to do with the welfare and liberty of the people of the United States. We only know what we have been told and shown by legacy media. If I were dared to believe my own eyes, I'd have to say the only real conflicts China has ever had in their 3,500 year of history were entirely internal. Government overthrows, etc. They have expressed zero interest in expansion beyond their own borders, and there is no evidence that they plan to invade Taiwan. There is absolutely no evidence that China has ever interfered with American elections, nor has anyone ever produced a single shred of evidence that China was at the core of any false information campaigns. You can decide for yourself how or to what end controlling the narrative about China serves, but I think we owe it to ourselves and our legacy to seek to understand rather than let ourselves be manipulated just because we believe those telling the story, like Nikki Haley, know more than we do. Well, I'm telling you, they don't. They don't even try. They only peddle hate and fear. But as a people, we must. Take a look at your sons and daughters. Do you love and cherish them? Of course you do. Doesn't it make sense that Chinese people love and cherish their children? Doesn't it make more sense that they, like us, want their children to grow up and love and cherish their own children? Doesn't it make more sense that China would rather have peaceful relations with its number one trading partner? I think people are finally seeing for the first time, the proverbial curtain being pulled back on who the propaganda peddlers really are. Can anyone think of a single reason to trust our government anymore? I know we truly want to trust our government. You can tell by the record number of people showing up to vote. It's not working, is it? Because it seems no matter whom we elect, it has become crystal clear that they are not representing the wishes or the interests of Americans. Does the average American think we should be starting regime change wars all over the world? Does the average American think we should be sending $110 billion and all of our reserve armaments to Ukraine just to get horribly defeated? And 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed and another 200,000 that have been functionally and permanently wounded and will never be normal again, let alone return to battle? All for a country that was and still is seen as the most corrupt country in the world. It was a shameful and futile attempt to weaken Russia. And not only did it backfire, Russia is stronger both economically and militarily than it has been in 30 years, in spite of the crushing sanctions they are under. At least the German military chief was brave enough to say it, but in my opinion, didn't go far enough and tell people about the dismal state of his own military. Putin has shown the world there is life after SWIFT banking system. In 2006, BRICS wasn't expected to be anything more than a novelty, but thanks to the world witnessing how the U.S. wields financial extortion over the countries that participate in the system and how they have no problem stealing money left in their trust, a sovereign country they don't like, and giving it to another they do, there are now 40 countries lined up to join BRICS, many of which have never been sanctioned but have seen the devastating effects of anyone on the system that doesn't bend a knee to Western hegemony. For several months now, China has been quietly dumping our long-term treasuries. The current holdings are the lowest since China became a market economy, and other countries are slowly doing the same. If BRICS becomes as successful as it seems the West is making it, there will be more than treasuries coming back home. Imagine all that cash sovereign nations are holding in reserve that loses massive value every single day we continue to print our way into insolvency. There will be no reason to hold as much, if any, currency in reserve anymore, and those currency holdings will be dumped, causing a hellstorm in the foreign exchange or Forex, which will in turn, without a doubt, trigger a massive sell-off of securities in the broader markets. Hamburger, the number one food item purchased by Americans in 2020, was around $3.75 a pound, and today it is over $7 at Safeway. Imagine that same pound of beef being $20 or even $30 per pound. If the food that Americans consume the most are doubling every 3 years, at what point will we be unable to afford it at all? What will happen to the food suppliers like farmers and ranchers that can no longer operate because nobody can afford their products? We are led to believe that sanctions are a viable alternative to armed conflict, but you can now see one way those sanctions make their way back home. To add insult to injury, Blinken announced it has imposed 500 more sanctions on Russia because of the death of Alexei Navalny in a Russian prison, a man that most of us never heard of until almost yesterday. I can assure you, most of that was just hot air anyway, since most of the sanctions are already in place. Besides, the West have highly exaggerated the popularity of Navalny. He never earned more than 5% approval in Russia and remained virtually unknown outside of Moscow. In 2012, he was indicted on charges of embezzlement, which was overturned for lack of evidence. So, in a couple of years, when they had the evidence, it was retried, and Navalny was convicted with a suspended sentence. Right after that, he ran for mayor of Moscow and secured an impressive 27% of the vote. The problem is that number hardly represents the majority of Moscow. Because of electronic ballots and new streamlined paper ballots, 2013 was the highest voter turnout in history with just under 20% of the population voting. What the Western media also fails to mention are the conflicting stories with what was sold as an attempt on Navalny's life in 2020. If there was an attempt on his life, it wasn't with the nerve agent Novichok, like they told the press. First of all, they can't make up their mind if it was in a cup of tea, in a water bottle, or in his underwear. None of which could possibly be true because Novichok cannot be used. Really, I mean it. It is so powerful that even the so-called residue the Germans said they found on the water bottle would have killed everyone on the plane, not to mention the people administering it. I find it curious the so-called evidence of the deadly agent came from the CIA literally immediately upon arrival in Germany. We don't know what made him sick, and maybe we won't. But telling everyone it was the most deadly nerve agent the world has ever seen was a big giant lie.